Thank you very much for having me again. My name is Stuart Sockman. I'm a retired military officer, and I decided to use my GI Bill to get a master's degree in public administration with an emphasis in homeland security and emergency management after I retired from the military. I did the program at UCCS up on the north end by the Bluffs, and I was working with a new group there called the Center for Human Security. It's run by Professor Steve Recca, who is also the co-chair for the Center for Homeland Security at the Navy's Postgraduate School in Monterey, which is pretty much the top school in the Homeland Security field for pretty much the whole world. So he started a Center for Human Security here. Now you might be asking, what's the difference between human security and homeland security? The UN defines human security as much broader than homeland security. Homeland security pretty much means that you feel safe. Human security includes things like, are you economically stable? Do you live in a democracy and have the right to vote? Are there free political parties? Is your media reasonably free? Things like this. So this is kind of a new concept at UCCS, and they're opening it up, and in addition to a lot of people who will be working with NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and nonprofits, they're now also working on with the military at Northcom and others on the whole security for the community issue. So my master's thesis / capstone was perceptions of wildfire and flooding preparations by residents in the Pikes Peak area. Do you feel that you are prepared for an event? And typically the two big events we worry about here are wildfire and flooding, although flooding is far more localized than wildfire. Okay, let's see if I can figure this out. Which one do you want to do?
Up and down.
Up and down, okay. Say our batteries. Maybe I'll aim it this way. All right.
You just tell me when you're ready.
Okay, sure. Thank you. All right, Waldo Canyon fire. You've been here more than a couple of years. You'll remember that. In June of 2012, plus a Black Forest fire in June of 2013. 800 houses destroyed, 4 people killed, 32,000 evacuated just from Waldo Canyon. That might seem like a lot, but let's think back to the Nepal earthquake just a couple of months ago. 7,000 people died, over 600,000 homes destroyed. I'm not making this sound like it's not significant, because it is, especially to the families that were affected. But it also speaks towards our level of preparation to begin with. We are better prepared than most people. We also had the Manitou Springs flooding in 2013 and 2014. Buildings, vehicles damaged. I'm sure we all saw the YouTube video of cars going down US 24 on a wave of water. That was pretty cool. Except for this, of course. So that, we have our issues here. Next slide, please. So what are we at risk for besides that? This is from USAA, the insurance company, and what states are at risk for what things. Now flooding is not on here because flooding can happen pretty much anywhere and it's a very localized event. We're at risk for wildfire. We're at risk for earthquakes. We're at risk for tornadoes. Hey, but not hurricanes. Yay. 1 out of 4. And I saw some eyebrows, earthquake. Yeah, we've got 2 faults. 2 west of here, one in the Manitou Rampart Range area, one west of there up U Pass. Both of them have the capability to put out as much as a 7.0 earthquake. There's less than a 0.5% chance, so once every 200 years we might get an earthquake. But just from the Colorado Geological Survey, they estimate that if we did have a 7.0, as many as 1,700 people could be killed, leaving 19,000 homeless, destroying 15% of area buildings, $100 million of damages just to highways and utility lines, as many as $12 billion worth of damages to the county, $29 billion statewide. They could also start, due to moving buildings, breaking gas lines, things like that, they estimate as many as 14 major fires, which then we'll have to deal with as well. Now obviously we're not living in the Bay Area. We don't have the same problems as San Francisco. Most of us should be able to sleep pretty easily at night, regarding earthquakes anyway. But it is something that people should be aware of. That is a risk out here. And tornadoes. I'm sure some of you are saying, you know, I live up in the mountain area. The tornadoes aren't really a factor. Well,
There's one in Woodland Park.
yeah, I was refereeing a soccer game in about 1979 at Bear Creek Park, and we had to cancel the game because a tornado came over the hill from Manitou. So it can happen. The geography and topography don't always stop these. Next slide, please. All right, so what can citizens do? Well, they need to be educated about the threat first. First thing is to find out what it is that you know and what you don't know, and then try to correct that. It also helps change your perceptions of risk. Once you know what's going on, it's a lot easier to decide whether the risk is something you want to prepare for or whether you're going to let it slide. So then, once you decide you do need to be prepared, you need to be educated on how to prepare. And the city does it. The city holds meetings, and they could hold more, but a lot of times these guys that work in emergency management, they're doing these meetings on their own free time because that's when people are available. So they do a number of meetings. I was talking to Mr. Brenner at the City Emergency Management Office a few months ago, and he said they do a number of meetings. And I went to one at Glen Erie a few months ago, and a whopping 12 people showed up for a flooding meeting. So it varies. They have 150 at some meetings, they have 5 at other meetings. Some of it's advertising, some of it's just people decide that it doesn't involve them. You need to take the action. Once you know how to prepare, you need to take the action. Do you need to cut down trees? Do you need to buy sandbags? Do you need to get more insurance? And this is all considered to be part of what's known as the mitigation phase in emergency management. There's several phases here. And mitigation means reducing the risk of an event happening and reducing the consequences of the event if it does happen. Next slide, please. All right, so my problem statement was, do the families living near the areas that are historically threatened by wildfire and flooding feel that they are prepared for the next hazard? Next, please. I sent out a survey. Some of the things that the literature on this, there are a lot of people that have been researching this all over the country, from Montana to Florida, if you count hurricanes. Do demographics matter? Does the amount of time you've lived in an area matter? Like, if you've been here for the Waldo Canyon fire, that's probably pretty well imprinted on your mind. I didn't evacuate, but I was the next group to evacuate if they called for it. So I had my car packed and everything, and I had, you know, my phone set up to get the county emergency alerts and all this stuff. So there is, when you've been through one of these, you do tend to remember it, but does that matter for your preparation level? Does your age matter? There's a lot of people who think that people, as they get older, they tend to get a little more conservative. They've seen a little more, they don't want to be caught by surprise. Does income matter? Does education matter? And does proximity to the threat? If you live right off of 30th there in Garden of the Gods, where they've had some flooding problems, how does that affect your perceptions and your preparation? Next slide, please. Thanks. Okay, so my methodology. This was an anonymous survey through SurveyMonkey, which is an online group that it was sent out via Kono. Mr. Munger was kind enough to help me pass it out. I have no idea who responded. I never saw the emails come back. All I got was the raw data as the people, probably some of you, responded to the SurveyMonkey survey. Out of 303 that were sent out, I got 40 back, 13.2%. Actually pretty good for an online survey. Typically it's 5 to 7%, so I feel pretty good about that. Apparently you all had something to say, and you wanted it to be heard. Population for the region, over 600,000. For Colorado Springs is 400,000, roughly. So 40 responses, not enough to generalize or to really be representative. Next question, please.
I did it,
Slide.
sorry.
Do you feel your family is prepared? So here's what I asked. Do you feel if your family is prepared for wildfire or flooding? Do you feel your community is prepared for wildfire or flooding? Have you received information? Have you attended training? Do you have a community organization that you can turn to help you receive this training that you know about? How would you like to receive this information? TV, radio, mail, internet, neighborhood training, were the 4 choices I had out there because those are the most common around the country. If your community is not prepared, and by community I was thinking more a local neighborhood, not Colorado Springs as a whole, but Broadmoor, Village 7, wherever. So was your community localized? Did you feel that they were there? Next please, thank you. So, again, not representative of the city as a whole. 45% of the respondents were 65 and older, compared to 11% of the general population. 83% of us are over 50. 100% of us are better looking than average. 89% had at least a bachelor's, compared with 36% of Colorado Springs' general population. 38% who responded had a master's degree. So this was a group that had been in school a little bit. 48%, which is pretty close to 50%, had a roughly average income for the region. 83% though had lived in the region at least 10 years. That's a lot. There are a lot of people who like it here and stay here. So that tells me that there are a lot of people who are here who have experienced a lot of the events we have. Next please. Thank you. All right, so when I analyze the data, I'm not going to give you the synopsis of the statistical number crunching with my P factors and R and all this other stuff, unless you're interested. I have it, but I doubt if you care about that. Age did not seem to matter, whether you felt you were prepared. But all age groups felt better about their personal readiness than they did about their community readiness. This held true for both wildfire and flooding. Length of residency also did not seem to matter whether you felt you were prepared or not. Same thing with your community. Due to small sample size, education and income did not seem to affect the perceptions of people being ready, but they did feel a lot better about the flooding threat than the fire threat, and I'll show you those numbers here in a minute. Proximity and training though, 65% that responded lived in proximity to fire hazard. This is the city fire department's official fire hazard map. Now don't pay attention to these hard straight lines on the west. That's just where the city boundary is. That's not where the fire hazard ends. Also does not include the Air Force Academy, Fort Carson. But you can see that there's quite an area there, mostly along the west side, but also to include Austin Bluffs, Pilot Rock, and Palmer Park that do have wildfire threats. 40% lived in the flood hazard area, and those include the creek that runs down 30th. There's one up north by Ute Valley Park that is also a flooding possibility. Fountain down through Manitou, and the intersection of the 2 creeks down by Colorado Avenue and America the Beautiful Park also has some flooding issues. Not too many houses in that area, but there are some issues.
What about Shook's Run?
Shook's Run, according to the data I found from FEMA, who controls all the flood maps and updates them about every 10 years, Shook's Run was not considered a floodplain area.
Okay.
I'm not saying that it can't flood per their maps. It's not statistically significant enough to be included. Now, people can petition FEMA to change that. So if people live in the Shook's Run area or along another creek and you feel that you have an issue, FEMA has a big regional office in Denver, and part of their job is to help with these sort of issues. So, and they are somewhat, as money and time allow, receptive to helping as best as they can to update these. And this means a lot for insurance purposes. Maybe not so much in Colorado, but I spent a lot of time living in Florida with hurricanes, and also in the Pacific Northwest, the Olympic Peninsula, which is a rainforest and has tsunamis. And what Florida considers a hurricane is every single day in Port Angeles with the winds and the weather. It's like, really? 60-mile-an-hour winds and you're worried? Really? Yes?
I was wondering about Shiny Creek.
Yes, that could be. Yeah. My friend Rose here has had some issues living up there as well. That probably could be as well. And we all know what happened to Seven Falls. Are they even open yet? They didn't reopen yet, did they?
Not yet.
And last month, hiking up at Helen Hunt, there was so much water in there. I couldn't believe it. I've never seen so much water in the creek. It could be two, but it would be another one of those that would need to go through probably the state and FEMA in order to be considered for that. And they look at historical records too. One summer does not a floodplain make. We're having an unusual amount of rain this year. 2012, Waldo Canyon, we didn't get much rain, so they'll go on statistical analysis. That's not to say it wouldn't be considered one if they reanalyzed it. But again, FEMA would have to look at it. And they bring in geologists, they look at historical records, they go through hydrologists, they might bring in the Army Corps of Engineers, and it's a big deal. And it costs a lot of money to do those, but they can do it.
I was just curious because there are restrictions in terms of the city and flood zones for development and building and how that aligns with, I know down on South Nevada, there's some, in Brookside,
Yeah.
that area.
Now, some of that area is grandfathered in. A lot of that's grandfathered. You cannot change the rules. Well, you shouldn't change the rules on somebody after they've spent a lot of money to put their house somewhere. That being said, the National Flood Insurance Program is starting to tighten up significantly on people who make repeat claims. And pretty soon they're going to say, we're sorry, we're not going to insure you anymore. You've been told 5 times now, your house has been destroyed 3 times. You've rebuilt it in exactly the same place, exactly the same way. And this happened all over Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana. I saw this a lot when I was stationed down there. It was the same house, same location, same people, but the federal government was paying for it. So they didn't have any incentive to move. So there are limits, but for the most part, if you've already been there, they're going to leave you alone. Next slide, please. All right, so some of the data I found, considering wildfires in the area, do you feel your family's prepared? 60% of you felt that your family is prepared. This is better than the national average. Now, some may say, well, that's brought up a little bit by the fact that we have several large military bases here and they tend to be pretty prepared. I know wherever I lived, I was prepared for whatever my local events were because I knew I would be gone during the event helping other people because I ended up in the Coast Guard doing search and rescue. So my own house might be gone, but I wasn't going to be anywhere near it, so I made sure everything's ready. Most of the military families tend to do that anyway. So that may be driving this just a little bit. Next slide, please. Do you believe your community is prepared? Well, a few more than 50% felt your community was prepared, but not as many as felt you were personally prepared. So you look very suspiciously on your own neighbors. You're like, God, I wish they'd get rid of those trees, or I wish they'd, do something about that French drain that's coming right into my yard, or whatever. And there's probably a little level of frustration there. And there's also the feeling that perhaps your city government is not meeting your needs as well as they could. Next slide, please. Concerning the flooding we've experienced, do you feel prepared? Again, close to 70% now. A lot of you felt more felt you were prepared for flooding. That may be because few of you felt you were in danger of living in a flooding area. Maybe not as many of you lived near a big creek. But it also says that we feel we're pretty prepared. Next slide, please. Do you believe your community is prepared? Well, look at this. Less than 30% feel your community is prepared for flooding. This might be the whole stormwater issue. I don't know. Some of the responses I got to, I had an open-ended question. If your community is not prepared, why not? And I got back some great responses. And a lot of you mentioned the stormwater proposals and their failure to go through. I know my neighborhood up by UCCS, we're having a meeting later this week about infrastructure, and stormwater is going to be one of the things we discuss. And I believe that our council representative is going to be there. It was last time.
We have a council representative actually here who just walked in, Mr. Murray.
Okay.
Okay, I'll identify myself.
Okay. So if you don't feel that your community, your neighborhood is prepared or doing what they should be doing, there are avenues for you to address this, whether through the government, through your elected representatives, or through the appointed people that work in the Office of Emergency Management downtown. Next slide, please. Have you received information Well, fewer than 50% of you felt that you had received information. This can be improved. It's not that hard to, I get emails from my neighborhood organization all the time. I can get flyers, I can go online and find stuff. But this looks like the city might be able to be more proactive than this. Next slide, please. Does your neighborhood have a community organization? Well, less than 50% of you said yes. Chances are there is one that either you're not aware of or they're not doing perhaps as much as they might be able to. And that includes religious organizations, anyone that can provide you with training or assistance during an emergency. Next slide, please. Have you attended any training sessions on this? Less than 40% said you had actually attended training. So again, I meant go back to this Glen Erie piece where 12 people showed up, where the previous one they had 150. That's a big difference. Part of it's probably down to not enough advertising to let people know what's going on and where these events are taking place. Also, the longer we go from having one of these events, the more people decide, you know what, it doesn't affect me, I'll be okay. It doesn't take very long for another wildfire to start or another flooding event to happen. Okay, next slide, please. Which do you believe would help you prepare best? Well, of course, neighborhood training. That costs the most money, but it's probably the most effective too, to have somebody from the city, whether fire department, Office of Emergency Management, police department, come and talk to you. You can get together through your neighborhood organizations, whether it's your HOA, whether it's some other group, to make a request to have city folks, county folks, even state folks come and talk to you and give you information on how to prepare and what your threat really is. Next biggest one was online information, and it's very similar for wildfire and flooding, so I'm going to put up the wildfire here. Online next, mailed information, and radio was considered the least effective, radio, TV spots, probably because most of us fast forward to the commercials now anyway, right? Next, please. All right, so conclusions. Just as with other research, data, it was inconclusive because 40 responses out of 400,000 residents just you can't draw any conclusions. You're not going to be able to say, well, just because this one person said this, these other 100 people will feel the same way. So I can't draw conclusions. However, it would be nice if this was a longitudinal study, which means that the same people who answered these questions a couple of months ago, 10 years from now, were given exactly the same questions. How do they feel now? Do they still feel they're prepared? What events have happened in the meantime? Have we had another big fire, or have we just been living blissfully in paradise and we've had no problem? So this could go on quite a bit further. Another thing that is, we need to reach out more to communities that are underrepresented. This survey was only given in English. We do have communities that feel more comfortable with other languages, whether it's Spanish, Vietnamese, or whatever, that probably would like to have a voice, who did not. And so this could be, when the city gives training, they need to be thinking about that too. We're not a homogenous group. We're not monolithic. We represent a lot of different groups, cultures, backgrounds, and languages. And they need to recognize that, and we do too. Let's see, what else did I miss? Yeah, well, by making it anonymous, the smallest area I could go to was a zip code. We could get a lot more detailed information if it was no longer anonymous and people went to doors and asked you questions. Maybe that'll happen later. That's expensive. And it wasn't something the university was willing to fund, especially for a short-term project. Now, if this turns into something long-term, perhaps they will, and maybe the city will start collecting some data too. So, questions, concerns, issues? Yes, sir.
Will this be posted on a website, maybe the Kona website?
I can make it posted. I have about a 25-page paper that was part of my thesis project that I could also post through Mr. Munger if there was, anyone decided they wanted good sleeping material.
That could help us communicate with our
Okay.
neighborhood
Now, the
organizations.
paper does also have tables and graphs, that you saw quite a few of them on there, so.
I'm not getting up here to put an end to Stuart's presentation, but I wanted to let you know that Matt said that we could have, I believe, am I right? We'd have a copy of the recording, and we'll put that on the website.
And there's nothing I want to hide on this, so I would be perfectly happy to
Great.
give Mr. Munger a copy and let him, of both the presentation, the PowerPoint, and if you really care about the paper itself and the data. And I'll even give you my statistical analysis if you really care. Yes, ma'am?
You said that you collected it by zip code.
Yes.
Were your answers primarily from the areas that were affected by the fire and the flood?
Yes. If we can go back a little bit to probably about the 7th slide, I'll screen, right there, one more, there. So 65% of the respondents lived in these zip code areas that are considered fire hazard areas. So yes, we did get more people responding, and that very well could be that the people in those areas wanted their voices to be heard more. They wanted, hey, we're not getting this, or yes, we're doing okay, despite what other people said. Beyond focusing tighter than zip code though, we did not do that to maintain the anonymity of the respondents. Yes, sir?
Just to follow on that, out of the 40 people, how many different zip codes were represented?
I believe I had 19 zip codes respond. I had two people from Monument, and the rest from within the city limits.
That's
Pretty good.
outstanding.
Yes, but the majority of them did respond from these areas more to the west, not so much further out east. Now, wildfires, no, but grassland fires on a dry summer, those can move even faster than a wildfire. So they're not out of the woods, but I didn't get as many responses from there as I did from out west. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
On that, if you had a zip code that, mostly the zip codes are gonna be in and out of that fire
Correct, yeah.
area or the
If-
flooding area.
If at
So
least
you
half
have
of
to-
it was within a fire or flood area, I counted that whole zip code as within.
Yeah,
Because I just couldn't chop it any finer than that without
Yeah.
losing the anonymity of the survey.
mhm.
So. Any other questions, concerns? No?
Thank you very much.